"What in the world are you doing to my child?" He remained motionless in the entrance, astonishment clearly visible on his face, his gaze fixed on the sight before him. Maya Williams, the domestic worker, was tenderly holding and breastfeeding his infant son, Bryce. Her top was unfastened just enough for Bryce to comfortably feed, his tiny physique calm in her embrace. Her eyes were shut, and she softly hummed a melody, as though this situation was completely natural. Arthur's eyes expanded, then glowed with intense anger. "Remove your hands from my son," he roared, rushing into the chamber. Maya's eyes abruptly opened. Her body stiffened as pure instinct took over. She delicately and carefully unlatched Bryce from her breast and began to comfort him. "Mr. Moore, please allow me to clarify," she uttered, her voice quivering. However, he paid no attention. "Do you seriously think you can simply touch my offspring? Nourish him like some wretched wet nurse?" Arthur yelled, his voice breaking with fury and disbelief. "He is my son. Who on earth granted you such permission?" Maya slowly stood up, her arms still wrapped around Bryce's small figure. "I did not plan this," she stated. He had not consumed food for several days. He consistently rejected the formula. He was becoming weaker. I used to be a neonatal nurse, and I still produce milk." He latched. He required it. "Be quiet," Arthur commanded, his hands clenching at his sides. "I merely acted in what I believed was correct," she said with a bit more resolve this time. "He was starving, Mr. Moore." He ceased crying. He stopped moving. I could not simply observe him perish." Arthur moved closer, towering over her. "You crossed a boundary," he hissed. "You do not interfere with what is mine. You do not make decisions for my kin." And without a moment's notice, he struck her a forceful, open-handed blow that caused Maya to reel sideways, Bryce still clutched protectively in her arms. The infant's room became utterly silent. Bryce whimpered. Mia gasped, her hand flying to her cheek, but she did not weep. She did not shout. She merely stared at Arthur with wide, astonished eyes, then slowly turned her body to shield the infant. "How dare you?" she whispered. "I saved your offspring." Arthur's chest heaved. His hand lingered in the air for a moment, as if even he could not comprehend his own action. "I do not require salvation from someone like you," he spat. "Someone like me?" she echoed. Her voice now pierced the atmosphere with a quiet firmness. "Do you mean a black woman?" Arthur winced but remained silent. "I lost a baby 3 months ago," she confessed, tears burning but not falling. "I held him in my arms as he passed away. I comprehend the feeling of helplessness. To observe someone so small fade away while you stand by doing nothing." She took a breath. "I witnessed that identical expression in Bryce yesterday. And I performed what a mother does. I acted." Arthur averted his gaze, running his hands through his hair. Maya advanced, gently placing Bryce in his crib. The baby stirred once, then quieted, his abdomen finally satiated, his tiny body at peace. "I shall retrieve my belongings," she stated softly. Then she proceeded towards the exit. Arthur did not hinder her, but his hand quivered at his side. The corridor outside the nursery extended like a tunnel. Maya's heart pounded with each stride. Her cheek throbbed, and the reverberation of Arthur's palm still resonated in her bones, but worse than the physical impact was the loathing in his eyes. The disbelief, as if her very humanity had been obliterated in an instant. She was uncertain what caused more pain, being struck or being treated as if she did not belong. Down the hallway, one of the household staff members looked up, startled, but Maya remained silent. She walked past, composed and direct, until she reached her living quarters. Inside, she collapsed onto the bed, releasing the breath she had been holding. Her satchel lay in the corner, partially prepared since the day she began this employment. She gazed at it. Perhaps she ought to have departed much earlier. Yet even now, her arms still recalled the weight of Bryce. Her chest still remembered his necessity. And somewhere beneath the embarrassment and wrath, she felt no remorse. Back on the upper floor, Arthur stood alone beside the crib. He looked down at his son, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. There was no struggle visible on the boy's face. No tightly clenched fists, no gasping cries, only tranquility. Arthur sank heavily into the rocking chair. His complexion was pale, his hands trembling. He scrutinized them. The same hands that once supported his wife as she sobbed through postpartum nights. The identical hands that today struck the sole individual who had caused Bryce to cease crying. And suddenly, Arthur Moore, chief executive officer, billionaire, and widower, felt extremely, extremely small. In the tranquility, Bryce stirred and let out a small cooing sound. Arthur looked towards the door from which Mia had exited and whispered to himself, "What have I done?" Mia sat silently on the edge of her slender bed, a fractured mirror reflecting her swollen cheek. Her skin smarted, but what burned more profoundly was the disgrace. She had witnessed numerous events in her existence: poverty, demise, anguish, but had never conceived of being struck for rescuing a child. Outside, the Seattle sky had turned a dismal gray, the kind of overcast that settled like a burden on one's chest. She looked down at her hands. They still retained the warmth of Bryce. She had not experienced that kind of intimacy since Elijah's passing. A gentle rap startled her. It was not forceful, more akin to hesitation veiled in guilt. She cautiously opened the door. Eleanor Moore stood on the threshold, clad in a long burgundy housecoat, her silver-gray hair tightly twisted, her expression unreadable. In one hand, she held a steaming cup of tea. "May I enter?" she inquired, her voice even. Maya stepped aside. "Certainly, ma'am." Eleanor took a seat without awaiting an invitation, placing the cup on the side table. Her keen eyes surveyed the room, sparse, tidy, modest. "I was informed of the incident," she stated. "Assume had mentioned it," Maya replied, her tone restrained. "He did not." The butler overheard the commotion. "I had to inquire." Eleanor leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I observed the look in your eyes last week. The manner in which you held Bryce. You recognized that something was amiss before any of us did." I used to work in the neonatal intensive care unit," Maya said softly. "I have encountered that type of hunger previously. Infants shutting down. They cease crying when they are too weak." Eleanor nodded. "Arthur is grieving. But that does not absolve his actions." "No, it does not." For a moment, the two women sat in silence. A peculiar current passed between them, one not of sympathy, but of mutual understanding. Generational, maternal. "You could pursue legal charges," Eleanor stated. Maya looked at her, taken aback. "I will not," she quietly asserted. "He is shattered. I comprehend that sensation." Eleanor exhaled slowly. "You possess more fortitude than most." "I do not wish to be," Mia conceded. "I merely desire to act correctly." Eleanor's eyes briefly shifted towards Mia's valise in the corner. "Are you planning to depart?" "I believed I ought to," Maya responded. "After what transpired? It is apparent I do not belong here." Eleanor rose and moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "You saved my grandson. You did not transgress a boundary. You intervened where we failed. If you deem Maya a good person, extend her alike. And do not omit informing us of your viewing location for this video. Someone nearby might be silently following this narrative alongside you." Then she turned back to Maya. "If you choose to leave, it should be your decision. Not because a man reacted violently in distress." She departed without another word. Mia sat back down, her heart thumping. A part of her yearned to flee, but something deeper whispered, "Remain." Later that morning, Arthur sat alone in his study, surrounded by dark mahogany bookshelves and the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock above the mantel. He had not slept. The slap replayed in his thoughts repeatedly. It had been a reflex, irrational, unpleasant, raw. A lifetime of repressed sorrow had erupted in a single instant. He observed his reflection in the glass of the liquor cabinet. His face was pallid, appearing older than the previous day. The man gazing back was a stranger. A soft chime sounded. The intercom. "Mr. Moore," came the butler's voice. "Mrs. Eleanor requests your presence in the conservatory. She states it is urgent." Arthur sighed. "Inform her I will be there." The conservatory was permeated with natural light, an open space of warmth and verdure, far from the cold atmosphere of the rest of the dwelling. His mother stood near the bay window, observing the commencement of the rain's patter. "You wish to see me?" Eleanor turned. "Sit." Arthur complied, more from ingrained childhood habit than deliberate choice. She did not mince words. "You struck her." Arthur closed his eyes. "It was not. I desire no excuses." He looked up at her. "I was afraid, mother. I entered and saw, you saw your son, finally nourished, resting, and you punished the woman who enabled that. She crossed a line. She rescued your child." Arthur stared down at his hands. "I do not even truly know who she is. She is reserved. Keeps to herself. I never even—" "Then perhaps it is time you did," Eleanor interrupted. He looked up. "She experienced the loss of a baby, Arthur. She still lactates. She is trained, experienced. She performed what no one else in this residence could accomplish, including yourself." Arthur's throat constricted. "I made an error." "Then rectify it." That evening, Maya proceeded into the kitchen to return her uniform. Her agreement was hourly, informal, non-binding, merely another name on a lengthy roster of assistants circulating through the Moore estate. She did not anticipate a second opportunity. But when she unlatched the door to the laundry room, Arthur was present. He appeared exhausted, still in his dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, tie loosened. The chamber felt too small. "I was merely—" Maya began. "I understand," Arthur interjected. "I wish to intercept you before your departure." She remained silent. He observed the floor, then met her gaze. "I apologize," he stated, "for my words and my actions. I was incensed. Not at you, but at myself, at everything I cannot mend." Maya's arms folded, a subtle defensive posture. "I did not act for gratitude or commiseration. I comprehend you acted for Bryce and because that is your nature." A prolonged silence ensued. "I wish to set this right," Arthur appended. "I cannot alter what I did, but I do not desire your departure." Mia raised an eyebrow. "You are requesting my permanence?" He nodded. "As his caregiver. Not a domestic, but someone we trust." Mia scrutinized him. "It will not be simple." "Nothing of significance ever is." "I will not tolerate another physical blow," she stated calmly. "You ought not to have endured the first." Another moment of quietude passed. Then Maya sighed. "I will remain for Bryce, but if you ever raise your hand to anyone in that manner again—" "I will not," Arthur affirmed. "I swear." As she turned to leave, she halted at the doorway. "Mr. Moore," she articulated. "Yes. You are not the sole individual who suffered a loss. But your son still possesses a chance." Then she exited, her steps steady, her head held high, unaware that at that instant, Arthur Moore recognized he had not merely asked a maid to stay. He had asked a woman who already understood the meaning of contending for a child. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would ultimately save more than one. The following morning, Maya moved quietly through the Moore household. The acute stinging sensation on her cheek had now subsided into a dull ache. The atmosphere felt different, not lighter, but charged, as if something delicate had subtly shifted. She entered the nursery just as the initial rays of sunlight streamed through the lace curtains. Bryce stirred in his crib, his tiny arms extending above his head. When he perceived Maya, a sleepy smile gently curved the corner of his lips. It was merely a slight twitch, but it deeply warmed her. "Good morning, little man," she whispered, lifting him tenderly into her arms. She rocked him with ease, softly humming. This time, there was no hesitation. Her touch was confident, her purpose clear. Maya Williams, once a nurse, once a grieving mother, now stood as the improbable guardian of a billionaire's son. Downstairs, Arthur sat at the breakfast table, his untouched coffee growing cold. Eleanor was already sipping her tea, her eyes flickering over the morning paper. The tension between them was subtle, constrained, but discernible. "She remained," Eleanor stated without looking up. Arthur nodded. "I am aware. She did so for Bryce. Not for you. I also comprehend that. Eleanor folded the newspaper, setting it aside. Do not squander this second opportunity, Arthur. Not with her. Not with your son. If there is one lesson I have learned in 72 years, it is that pride does not comfort a baby through the night. People do. Arthur did not respond. His fingers drummed against the ceramic mug. He had established corporations based on logic, discipline, and precision. But this fatherhood was an unforeseen chaos. By mid-afternoon, Maya noticed the alteration. The housekeepers whispered more than usual. The butler barely met her gaze. One of the maids, Grace, a young woman with delicate features and a malevolent streak, scrutinized her from head to toe with a twisted smirk. So, Grace uttered as they passed in the hallway, you are the one now breastfeeding the billionaire's child. Maya paused. Her shoulders stiffened, but she did not turn around. You know, Grace continued, her voice syrupy sweet, I once thought you were simply reserved, but now I discern it. You are pursuing the long game. Closer to the infant, closer to the will. Clever. Maya slowly turned. Her voice was serene, sharp as glass. If I desired wealth, Grace, I would initiate a lawsuit against your employer for assault. I would own this damn house by now. Grace's smile faltered. Maya leaned in just enough for her words to sting. I do not engage in manipulation involving children, and I do not contend with females who gossip covertly. Then she walked away. But as she rounded the corner, something struck her. She had not considered how her role would be perceived by the other inhabitants of the house. The whispers, the stares, they were not solely about race or social standing. They concerned apprehension. Maya had transgressed an invisible boundary, and in doing so, she had become a menace. That evening after dinner, Arthur approached Maya in the hallway outside the nursery. He was dressed casually, without a suit or tie, just a plain button-up shirt and dark slacks. The sharp contours of his face appeared softer in the warm hallway illumination. May I converse with you? He inquired. Mia crossed her arms. You are conversing. Arthur exhaled. I have requested a therapist to visit the residence for Bryce. Perhaps for myself as well. Mia drew a breath. Now that is a beginning. I also wish to formalize your position, not merely as a caregiver, but as a guardian when I travel, with full rights, medical decisions, emergency protocols, everything. Maya's expression slightly hardened. Why now? Because I observed how everyone regarded you today, as though you do not belong. But you do. Mia shook her head. Belonging is not paperwork, Mr. Moore. It is earned. I know. That is why I am requesting your trust once more. She studied him for a moment. I will consider it, but not for you. For Bryce. He nodded, suppressing whatever pride he had retained. For Bryce. Later that night, Maya stood alone in the garden behind the estate. The city's glow flickered beyond the hills. The wind rustled through the foliage. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. She pulled her shawl more tightly and closed her eyes. The tranquility was interrupted by soft footsteps. Did not expect company, she stated without turning. Eleanor's voice came gently from behind. You appeared to be someone who needed a reminder. Of what? That you are not alone. Maya opened her eyes. It does not feel that way. Every glance, every whisper. It is as if I am a peril simply for existing. You are, Eleanor stated bluntly. You are a black woman in a dwelling constructed by white men with old wealth. You deviated from the role they designated for you. That frightens them. So what do I do? Maya inquired, her voice strained. You stand tall, you remain sharp, and you do not permit them to drag you back down. Mia turned to her, even if it intensifies? Eleanor nodded, especially if it intensifies. That night, as the house settled into silence, Mia checked on Bryce one final time. The infant slept peacefully, his arms extended like angelic wings, a soft snore escaping his nose. She observed him, her heart filled with a strange ache, part grief, part purpose. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know how deeply the whispers would cut. But she knew this, she was not departing. Not yet. Not while this child still required her. And not while the truth still awaited discovery behind every stare, every whisper, every shadow in the morning. The Moore household commenced with a precise orchestration. The hum of the espresso machine downstairs. The rustling of newspapers in the drawing room. The measured clatter of polished footwear against marble. But Maya, now assigned as Bryce's full-time caregiver, had learned to move in silence. Her existence was synchronized to the rhythm of an infant's needs, not the customs of affluence. Bryce giggled from his playpen in the conservatory, his tiny fingers gripping a plush giraffe. Maya watched him with a quiet smile, crouched beside him, holding a soft cloth in one hand and his milk bottle in the other. He had grown stronger, more vibrant. His once weary eyes now followed her every movement. "Good morning, son." "Sunshine," she whispered, stroking his curls. The sliding glass door behind her opened with a soft whoosh. Arthur entered, tablet in hand. He hesitated at the threshold, observing his son with an expression somewhere between awe and regret. Bryce squealed at his sight and reached up. Arthur crossed the room, crouched down, and lifted the boy with both arms. "Hey buddy, did you sleep well?" Bryce burbled contentedly, his chubby hands patting Arthur's collar. Maya stood slowly watching them. "He is gaining weight," she noted. "His appetite is consistent now." Arthur nodded. "That is your doing." "Thank you." Maya merely inclined her head, then turned to gather the toys scattered on the floor. She did not require commendation. She required consistency, security, and answers. "Listen," Arthur stated as Bryce cooed in his arms. "I wish to show you something." After his nap, she looked at him cautiously. "Show me what?" "Something I should have examined a long time ago." 3 hours later, after Bryce had been lulled into a profound slumber, Maya followed Arthur down a long, dimly lit corridor adorned with dusty portraits. He led her into his late wife Claire's private study, a room untouched since her passing. It was a chamber filled with warmth, yellow curtains, well-used books, and photographs of family moments frozen in time. Arthur walked to the distant cabinet and unlocked it with a brass key. He extracted a thick black leather ledger, filled with years of receipts, letters, and hastily scrawled notes. "This was Claire's," he stated, placing it flat on the desk. She meticulously recorded everything, every donation, every check, every caregiver application. She was precise. Mia stepped forward slowly. "Why are you presenting this to me?" Arthur flipped to a bookmarked page. "Because 2 days prior to her demise, she inscribed your name." Mia blinked. "What?" Arthur nodded. "I was unaware she had even met you." Mia took a breath. "I never formally met her. I applied for a nurse position through a referral service. They indicated the family had already engaged someone. I never received a response." Arthur pointed to a sticky note faded with age. "Maya Williams, calm eyes. Claire's pain could be the one." He looked up. "She perceived something in you. And now I ponder if she saw what I failed to see." Maya lightly ran her fingers over the page. "She must have interviewed me when I brought Elijah to the clinic." Arthur furrowed his brow. "Your son?" Maya nodded. "He was unwell. I lacked insurance." A woman entered the waiting room. She sat beside me, conversed with Elijah, inquired about my life. She never revealed her name. Arthur sank into the chair behind the desk, his voice soft. "That was Claire. She performed such acts. Disguised kindness. Anonymous philanthropy." Silence descended between them as both endeavored to connect the invisible threads that now extended backward through time. Then Maya inquired, "Why now?" Arthur gently closed the book. "Because I believe Claire was attempting to convey something to me about you, about who should have been here all along." That night, as Maya prepared Bryce's bedtime bottle, she felt a new burden settle in her chest. Claire had chosen her. Even in quietude, even in death, this woman, this unfamiliar individual, had endeavored to construct a connection. She considered the animosity in Grace's tone, the frigid glances from the staff, the slap that still reverberated in her bones, and she pondered, "No one gets to redefine my place here." Later, while checking on Bryce, Maya discovered something peculiar, an ancient toy rattle with the initials, carved into the wood. It differed from the other toys in the room, worn, hand-painted, and clearly cherished. She carried it downstairs to the butler, Mr. Halford, a gaunt man in his 60s with an impassive face and eyes that perceived everything. "Do you know to whom this belonged?" she inquired. Halford accepted the rattle, his eyes narrowing. "This belonged to Edward, Arthur's elder brother." Maya blinked. "Arthur has a brother?" "Had," he corrected. "Edward died when he was 6. Drowned in the estate pond. Tragic." She tilted her head. "I did not observe a grave." "There is none," Halford stated, lowering his voice. "The family concealed it. His mother never forgave herself. Claire never discussed it." Maya's instincts hummed. The rattle, the name, the absent chapter. And then she inquired, "Did Claire ever approach that pond?" Halford hesitated. Occasionally she would walk there alone, merely stand contemplating. Maya stared at the rattle in her hand. There were specters in this dwelling, and not all of them resided solely in the past. That night, as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, Maya wrote in her journal by the glow of a small desk lamp, "Claire knew about me, about something else, something more profound. Bryce is not merely a child entangled in sorrow. He is the key to a heritage replete with secrets." She paused, lightly tapping the pen. "And this house, this family, they are not simply grieving the deceased, they are concealing them." She closed the journal, placed it in her drawer, and locked it. Tomorrow she would visit the pond alone. Because sometimes the truth does not knock on doors. Sometimes it whispers beneath the water. The walls of this opulent confinement. At dawn, while the estate still slumbered and the sky blushed a pale gold over the treetops, Maya quietly exited through the kitchen door. She wore a thick cardigan and sturdy footwear. The old rattle with the initials was tucked into her pocket. A light mist curled across the grass, enveloping the grounds in an ethereal silence. The pond lay beyond the hedgerows, past the orchard, concealed behind a veil of wild rose bushes and birch trees. It was not indicated in the estate's architectural plans. It was not included during garden tours, yet it remained there, dark and forgotten. She located it with ease. It rested in a shallow depression, its water dark and motionless. A decaying bench leaned askew near the bank, partially submerged in the mossy earth. Dragonflies hovered over the water, their wings catching the light like stained glass. Maya stood at the edge, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning the still surface. It did not appear to be a place where a child had once drowned. It looked as though it had been waiting. She extracted the rattle from her pocket. The wood was smooth from decades of handling. She turned it over in her fingers, then glanced towards the trees. "Claire," she whispered, "why did you lead me here?" The breeze shifted, and with it came the faint creak of the old bench. Maya slowly sat, allowing her gaze to drift across the pond. The silence here was not tranquil. It was weighty, watchful, holding its breath. Then she noticed the stones just beneath the surface, near the pond's center. Something geometric shimmered. Maya cautiously stepped forward, squinting. It appeared to be a foundation, a square structure submerged just beneath the murky surface. She crouched by the water's edge, her fingers brushing the damp moss. That was no accident. Someone had constructed something here long ago. Then, deliberately, it had been flooded. She stood, feeling unsettled. As she turned to leave, her foot struck something hard. She looked down and gently kicked at the soil. A piece of stone protruded. She knelt, cleaning it with her sleeve. It was a marker. Faint, worn lettering, almost erased by time and rain. Edward Moore, beloved son. 1972 to 1978. Her breath caught. The grave was here, hidden, solitary. Suddenly, everything became clear. The secrecy, the whispers. Eleanor's guilt. Arthur's silence. This child, Arthur's elder brother, had not merely drowned. He had been erased. Back at the house, Maya moved swiftly through the back corridors. She was uncertain what she sought, but she felt an urgency, compelling her forward. The rattle remained in her coat pocket like a protective charm, warm from her palm. In the library, she found an old family photo album wedged between two forgotten encyclopedias. She flipped through pages of formal portraits, birthdays, weddings, business galas. But Edward appeared only twice, once as an infant in Claire's arms, once standing beside Arthur, both boys in matching suits. Then nothing. She frowned. Even in the wealthiest families, children were not simply expunged from memory. She was still turning pages when Eleanor quietly entered behind her. "You discovered him," the older woman softly stated. Mia turned, startled. "The grave," Eleanor continued. "You visited the pond." Maya nodded slowly, closing the album. "Why was he interred there?" Eleanor sighed, walking to the window. "Because my husband was a man who believed frailty should be concealed. Edward was not like the other boys. He was delicate, sensitive. There were hushed conversations back then about his demeanor, his speech, his predispositions. Words such as defective were employed. My husband could not endure it." Maya's chest tightened. "So he was kept out of sight?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice brittle. "Claire advocated for him. But by then, the silence had already taken root. And when he drowned, we buried him in shame." Maya's jaw clenched. That was not his shame to bear. "No," Eleanor agreed. "It was ours, and it torments this residence." They stood in silence for a prolonged moment. "Claire used to sit by that pond every morning," Eleanor finally stated. She referred to it as her penance. Maya took a breath. She left the rattle. Eleanor nodded. "And you discovered it?" Later that evening, Arthur stood in the nursery watching Maya feed Bryce. Her arms moved instinctively, her voice low and soothing. The boy's eyes fluttered with sleep. There was a tranquility in the room that Arthur had not experienced since Claire's death. "I owe you the truth," he suddenly declared. Maya looked up. "About Edward, about everything." "I already know," she replied. "Or enough of it to comprehend." Arthur exhaled. "When I was a boy, I used to sneak out to see him. My father prohibited it. But Edward, he was benevolent. He taught me how to fold paper cranes. He used to hum lullabies. He was a source of lightness in a very dark house." He looked down, his voice strained. "And when he perished, no one properly grieved him. They merely interred the memory." Maya nodded. Claire attempted. She left subtle clues. Arthur met her gaze. "And you pursued them." There was another pause. Then Mia softly articulated, "Bryce deserves better than specters. He deserves a family that does not suppress the painful aspects." Arthur crossed the room and gently took his son from her arms, cradling him. "He will," he asserted. "Because of you." Maya hesitated. "What transpires now?" Arthur looked at her, his voice resolute. "We shall reintegrate Edward into this residence. We shall utter his name. We shall honor him. And we shall commence what we ought to have done years ago." "And the staff?" Maya inquired. "The judgment, the whispers?" "They will learn," Arthur stated, "or they will depart." Maya nodded, her lips pressed tightly. Then she voiced something that astonished even herself. "Allow me to assist you in this endeavor." Arthur blinked. "You are staying?" "Yes," she affirmed. "But this is not merely about care. It is about veracity." A prolonged beat. Then Arthur smiled, a genuine, weary expression, filled with something Maya had not previously witnessed, hope. As the rain began to fall outside, the nursery became more than a chamber. It became a genesis, for Bryce, for Edward, for Maya, and for a man striving to amend the transgressions of his past. The following morning, a storm enveloped the estate, saturating the lawns and shrouding the mansion in a gray mist. Maya stood at the breakfast counter, stirring oatmeal on the stove. Bryce sat in his high chair, babbling between spoonfuls of mashed banana, his face smeared with cheerfulness and mischievousness. Arthur entered, freshly shaven, carrying a folder in one hand. "We commence today," he stated. Maya glanced up. "Commence what?" "Redemption," he responded, sliding the folder onto the table. "A memorial for Edward. Official, public. He will not be forgotten again." Maya looked at him for a prolonged moment, then slowly nodded. It is overdue. They sat down together after breakfast and reviewed Claire's old notes, the few childhood photographs they had salvaged, and the handwritten letter she had once secreted in a poetry book. In it, Claire had inscribed, "The shame is not in who Edward was. The shame is in our silence." Arthur read it aloud, his voice faltering at the concluding line. He cleared his throat. "We will commission a plaque. Host a small gathering." Eleanor declared she would speak. Mia rested her fingers lightly on the page. "And the pond?" "We will restore it," he affirmed, "clean it up. Place a proper stone there." Claire would have desired that. As they labored, Maya observed another change. Arthur was transforming. The sharpness in his demeanor was softening, the rigidity in his posture easing. The guilt had worn him for years, but now purpose seemed to be smoothing over the fissures. However, not everyone embraced change. Later that afternoon, Maya encountered Grace in the hallway. The maid stood near the linen closet, her arms folded, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I overheard there is to be a ceremony," Grace stated lightly. "Amusing, I presumed deceased secrets remained interred." Maya met her gaze. "And Edward deserves peace." "Edward is gone," Grace hissed. "But you are not. And some individuals believe you are growing excessively comfortable." Maya stepped forward, her voice low. "If you possess information, articulate it. Otherwise, keep out of my path." Grace scoffed. "You believe proximity to that infant renders you invulnerable. But you are merely another domestic with a tragic narrative. Do not overlook your designated place." "I did not forget," Maya calmly rejoined. "I simply never acceded to the one you attempted to confine me to." Before Grace could respond, a door creaked open nearby. Eleanor emerged from her parlor, her gaze settling on both women. Her expression was unreadable, but her words were distinct. "Grace," she uttered, her voice like a gavel, "I believe the linens can await. Go inspect the silver in the dining hall." Grace hesitated, then stormed off. Eleanor turned to Mia. "Do not permit the serpents to distract you. They hiss most vociferously when they are fearful." Mia faintly smiled. "Thank you." "You are welcome," Eleanor said. "But do not thank me until the ceremony concludes. Some specters do not appreciate being disturbed." That night, after Bryce had been bathed and placed in bed, Mia wandered the corridors. The storm had passed, leaving behind streaks of moonlight on the polished floors. She carried Claire's poetry book under her arm, uncertain why, but drawn by an intuition. She paused outside Claire's study. The door was ajar. Inside, the room glowed with soft lamplight. Eleanor sat at the desk, flipping through an old ledger. Maya knocked lightly. "I did not intend to intrude." Eleanor glanced up. "Come in. You should examine this." Mia stepped nearer. Eleanor turned the ledger towards her. This time, it was not Claire's handwriting. It was the late Mr. Moore's, scribbled notations, dated columns, and one page circled in red ink. Maya squinted. "What am I observing?" Eleanor tapped the page. "Payments to a private clinic, monthly for 7 years after Edward's death." Maya's eyes widened. "That does not compute." It does," Eleanor said grimly, "if he did not die." Mia stared at the page. "Are you suggesting Edward might be alive?" Eleanor folded her hands. "Or someone was being compensated to affirm he was not." The revelation struck Maya like frigid water. She looked down at the rattle, now perpetually tucked into her coat pocket. The initials, the concealed grave, the sealed records. It all seemed less like a tragedy and more like a cover-up. "Why would they falsify his death?" she inquired. "Shame," Eleanor articulated, "and dominance. My husband desired no blemish on the Moore name. But Claire, she may have relocated him, hidden him, kept him safe. That would account for the payments, the secrecy." Maya's hands trembled. Eleanor gently stated, "We need to ascertain where the funds went and who cashed the checks." Maya slowly nodded. "I will assist." Eleanor offered a rare, wistful smile. "Good, because the walls in this dwelling, they are beginning to speak, and I believe they are addressing you." Later, in the quietude of her room, Maya sat at her writing desk and opened her journal. There is a boundary between what we recall and what we conceal. Today I crossed it. The deceased may not always be deceased, and justice may still possess a trajectory. She tapped the pen, her breath steadying. If Edward is out there, someone knows, and I intend to discover them. She closed the journal and whispered into the still air, "Claire, if you are guiding me, do not cease now." The house creaked in response. Outside, the wind intensified, and somewhere beneath the surface of years of silence, the truth stirred, poised to emerge. The following morning, the estate pulsed with a subtle tension. Staff moved with greater restraint. Whispers curled in corners like smoke, and the weight of unstated truths made the atmosphere feel dense. Mia could sense it in every room she traversed. The walls knew, and they were weary of remaining silent. In Claire's study, Arthur joined Maya and Eleanor just after sunrise. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, an indication that he had relinquished denial. Eleanor had printed copies of the ledger pages from the preceding night and placed them on the table beside a pot of fresh coffee. Arthur scanned the page with furrowed brows. "You are certain these payments persisted after Edward's death?" Maya responded for Eleanor. "Same amount, same recipient code, but the bank account traces to a small private facility in upstate New York. One specializing in behavioral rehabilitation and trauma therapy." Arthur sank into the leather armchair. "Claire must have placed him there." Eleanor nodded. "And your father permitted her, as long as it remained off the record." Maya pressed forward. "We need to ascertain if he is still there, or if he was ever there." Arthur abruptly stood. "I will contact my attorney." Quietly, Eleanor's voice interjected, firm and low. "If he is alive, Arthur, you do not get to determine what happens next. Claire chose to protect him. You will need to do more than discover him. You will need to earn him." Arthur did not contest. His silence indicated agreement. That afternoon, while Eleanor communicated with the clinic under the pretext of a historical family inquiry, Mia took Bryce for a stroll across the grounds. The boy giggled in his stroller, pointing at birds, leaves, and passing clouds as if he were naming stars. Maya felt a peculiar calm in her chest. She possessed no certainty of what they would find. But something profound within her whispered that she was precisely where she needed to be. As they reached the edge of the orchard, a voice called from behind. "You do not belong here." Maya turned to find Grace standing by the gate, her arms folded, her eyes cold. "You have been agitating matters," Grace continued, digging through graves, turning Arthur against his own kin. Mia stepped between the stroller and Grace instinctively. "I am assisting this family in healing. Something you clearly have no interest in." Grace scoffed. "Heal or replace. Do not believe we fail to perceive it. You, with your measured voice and injured eyes, feigning to be the savior, but you are merely opportune." Maya's expression remained unchanged. "If truth renders you uneasy, perhaps you are positioned on the incorrect side of it." Grace stepped closer. "You should have remained in your designated place." "And what place is that?" Maya quietly inquired. "The one that does not rewrite family history." Just then, Eleanor's voice resounded behind them. Grace, the older woman, stiffened. Eleanor approached slowly, her cane tapping the stones. "You have uttered enough. Maya possesses more dignity in one finger than you have demonstrated in 30 years. Grace's face contorted, but she remained silent. She turned and stormed back towards the house. Eleanor sighed. "Snakes still slithering." Mia softly chuckled. "At least they hiss loudly enough to be heard." Later that evening, a telephone call came from the clinic. Arthur received it in the drawing room, his hands slightly trembling. When he returned to Maya and Eleanor, his face was pale, his eyes wide. They confirmed he was admitted under the name Edward Graves, Arthur stated. Same birth date, same photo Claire provided them. He was there for 19 years. "And now?" Maya inquired. Arthur swallowed. "He left 6 years ago voluntarily. No forwarding address, but they say he was gentle, kind, quiet. They preserved a journal he wrote in. It is locked in storage." They will release it if we appear in person. Eleanor sat down heavily. So he might be anywhere. Arthur nodded. Mia stood. Then we go retrieve the journal. The following morning, Arthur and Mia boarded a small charter plane bound for New York. Eleanor remained behind with Bryce, observing from the terrace with a hand on the child's shoulder as the car vanished down the estate drive. Arthur spoke little during the flight. Maya read quietly, but her mind buzzed with inquiries. Who had Edward become? Did he know he had been cherished? Did he even remember them? The clinic was situated on a quiet hill, surrounded by pine trees and shrouded in fog. It was modest, antiquated, its brick exterior softened by ivy and time. A nurse named Carol met them at the gate. He was our most courteous resident, she stated warmly, never raised his voice, spoke softly, painted landscapes. She led them to the archives room where an assistant retrieved a small cedar box. Inside was a weathered journal, its cover hand-stitched with a simple tree. Maya gently opened it. The handwriting inside was delicate, slanted, and precise. Today, I recalled a song, my mother's voice. I cannot recall the lyrics, but I remember her laughter when I aired. She turned the page. There was a girl by the pond once. She possessed red shoes. She instructed me not to weep when I stumbled. That I was brave. Arthur sharply inhaled. That was Claire, he whispered. She always wore red flats by the pond. Maya flipped further. The entries became sparse, more melancholic. I wonder if they remember me, or if I am merely a specter in someone else's dwelling. She slowly closed the journal. He is out there, Maya stated. Somewhere, Arthur. Arthur nodded. And we are going to locate him. She met his eyes. No, she stated. We are going to bring him home. The wind became sharper upstate as Arthur and Maya drove through quiet back roads flanked by red barns and fields turned golden with autumn. The weight of the journal rested between them like a third passenger. Each page had peeled back a layer of a man once obliterated, now slowly emerging from the obscurity of silence. They returned to the city, and with Eleanor's assistance, engaged a private investigator, a quiet, well-dressed man named Reuben Hale, whose expertise lay in tracing long-lost family members. Over coffee in the estate's conservatory, Reuben placed the worn leather briefcase that never left his side on the table. I do not guarantee miracles, Reuben asserted. But your brother did not simply vanish. Individuals leave traces, patterns, choices. Maya handed over the journal. Commence here. For 2 weeks, the estate settled into an unusual rhythm. Arthur resumed managing the business remotely. But his late nights were now filled with extended walks and tentative conversations with Eleanor. Maya assumed charge of the nursery and Bryce, and quietly sorted through the lingering contents of Claire's old storage trunk, seeking, perpetually seeking. Then one rainy Thursday morning, the call came. Reuben's voice was calm but electrified. We located someone. Maya sat upright on the edge of the couch. Where? Pennsylvania. A man using the name Eli Garrison resides in a small apartment above a used bookstore. He pays in cash, keeps to himself, and teaches children how to paint at the local community center. Arthur, who had been standing nearby, dropped his cup. It is him. He possesses no legal records prior to 2001, Reuben stated. But his handwriting corresponds to the journal. 3 days later, Maya and Arthur stood across the thoroughfare from Page and Willow, a brick bookstore with ivy creeping up its sides. Through the rain-speckled glass, they observed a man arranging canvases behind the counter, tall, slender, with graying temples. He moved with deliberate gentleness. He wore a cardigan with a torn cuff and sneakers that appeared older than Bryce. Arthur's voice faltered. I am uncertain if I can manage this. Maya touched his arm. You must. They crossed the street. Inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. The man turned for a moment. Nothing transpired between them except the passage of time. Then Arthur whispered, Edward. The man blinked, his eyes a brilliant blue and probing, settling on Arthur's face. I have not heard that name in decades. Arthur stepped forward, trembling. I am your brother. The man, Edward Eli, Whoever he had become appeared stunned. He reached out as if fearing the moment would dissolve. I presumed you all forgot. Maya observed the scene with tears pricking behind her eyes. The air shimmered between the men like something sacred, recognition without words. Reunion born from silence. Arthur stated, Claire bequeathed me clues. She never ceased loving you. Edward's lips trembled. She saved me. Removed me before the physicians executed father's wishes. She discovered individuals who concealed me. Protected me. I adopted a new name. Lived quietly, safely. Maya stepped forward. She left a path for us. And now she has returned you. Edward looked at her. You are the one from the journal. She blinked. What? You came to the pond. I observed you there. Holding my rattle. Arthur stared between them. How? Edward faintly smiled. You believe I departed without ever looking back? I returned a few years ago. I stood by the pond. I witnessed her grave. And then I saw you. You appeared as someone who could bear a truth. Maya covered her mouth with her hand. Edward continued. But I did not anticipate you would ever reach this far. Arthur stepped forward again. Will you return home? Edward looked around at the small bookstore. I constructed peace here. But your name, Arthur stated, deserves to live again. A prolonged pause. Then Edward slowly nodded. I will come for Claire and for the boy. Arthur blinked. Bryce. Edward's smile deepened. He resembles her exactly when she was small. The same eyes. Arthur remained silent. He only moved forward, and the two men embraced, 40 years of silence collapsing into one trembling, tearful moment. Back at the estate, Eleanor stood on the terrace with Maya. Bryce toddled through puddles, giggling. They are en route, Mia stated. Eleanor closed her eyes. Then this house will be whole again. The car arrived at dusk. Edward slowly exited. He wore a coat too thin for the cold, and Maya immediately took it upon herself to retrieve a warmer one from the hall closet. Eleanor met him on the steps. Her voice trembled. You resemble your father exactly. But gentler, Edward smiled. And you have not changed at all. They embraced tightly. Arthur approached Maya's side as she observed them. You have restored something to us that we were unaware we required. No, Mia quietly stated. Claire did. As night descended and the fire roared in the grand hall, Edward sat beside Eleanor and Arthur, Bryce asleep in Mia's lap. Narratives began to emerge, memories long suppressed. It was not a flawless reunion, but it was authentic. And sometimes that sufficed. The house, once echoing with secrets, now murmured with life again. Edward's presence sent a subtle ripple through every room. Staff trod more softly. Eleanor smiled more readily, and Arthur appeared less burdened, even in silence. But peace, Mia understood, was never gratis. It came at the cost of confrontation, and the specters of the past rarely departed quietly. On the second morning of Edward's return, Mia awoke early. The sky outside was thick with fog, the kind that obscured the boundaries of truth. As she descended the grand staircase, she discovered Edward already seated in the library, leafing through an old photo album with trembling hands. He looked up and smiled. I had forgotten how many faces we once knew. Mia sat across from him. Time buries so much. Edward closed the book. But not everything remains interred, does it? Mia tilted her head. Is there something you are not disclosing to me? He hesitated. There is something I overheard years ago, just prior to Claire taking me away. Maya leaned in. Father, he did not merely wish for my absence. He desired the elimination of everything that could connect me to the family. There were correspondences Claire had penned to a reporter, a trusted friend, attempting to expose how Edward Moore Sr. had coerced physicians to classify me as unstable. She intended to make it public. Maya's eyes widened, but nothing ever materialized. Edward nodded. Because someone thwarted it. I believe those letters were intercepted. By whom? I do not know. But Claire instructed me to confide solely in Eleanor if anything ever transpired. She stated Eleanor was privy to more than she divulged. Later that morning, Maya discovered Eleanor on the back patio, sipping tea, a shawl draped around her shoulders. Bryce toddled nearby, pursuing a wind-blown leaf with singular delight. "Eleanor," Maya began gently, "what do you comprehend regarding Claire's attempt to go public?" The older woman did not flinch. "I cautioned her not to. Told her the family would fragment before admitting its transgressions. Did you aid in concealing her letters?" Eleanor's expression became stern. "No, but I assisted in concealing her. After your son died, you understood what it meant to grieve in silence. Claire was grieving long before that for the brother they sought to erase." Maya's voice lowered. "Edward believes someone close stopped her." Eleanor sighed. "Your instincts are accurate, but be cautious. The decay in this house is not solely in the past. It breathes." That afternoon, Arthur convened a family meeting in the drawing room. The atmosphere was taut. Bryce had been put down for his nap, and the only sound in the room was the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Arthur stood facing Eleanor, Maya, and Edward. "I have resolved to amend the family trust," he stated. "Edward's name will be reinstated. His inheritance will be restored." Eleanor nodded. Edward looked down. Maya remained silent. Grace, standing near the hallway door with a tea tray, froze for just a second too long. Maya caught it. Arthur continued, "And Maya, should she elect to remain, will be appointed as guardian to Bryce in the event of my demise. Legal, final." A clatter reverberated through the room. The tea tray hit the floor. Grace stood, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. "I knew it," she hissed. Everyone turned. "You brought her here. Permitted her to nurse your son, unearth graves, rewrite history so you could supplant us." Arthur's voice was cold. "Grace, you were never family." "Oh, but I was closer than she will ever be." Grace spat, her voice trembling. "Inquire of her what she discovered in the attic. Inquire of her about the letters." Maya stood. "You knew." Grace's eyes darted. "Claire trusted me once. Then she began asking too many questions. Documenting things. I had no recourse." "You annihilated them," Maya asserted. "No," Grace slowly stated. "I concealed them." The room held its breath. "Why?" Eleanor inquired almost gently. Grace's voice cracked. "Because they would have ruined everything. You imagine this household operates on truth? It operates on silence." Arthur stepped forward. "You are concluded here. Vacate this residence." Grace laughed bitterly. "Expel me, but it will not alter who you are or who your father was." She turned on her heel and stormed out. The front door slammed seconds later. Mia turned to Arthur. "We must locate those letters." Edward spoke, his voice small. "She mentioned the attic." That evening, Maya and Edward ascended the narrow servant stairwell that led to the third-floor attic. The door creaked open to reveal dust, old trunks, and the scent of forgotten years. They sifted through boxes for over an hour, holiday decorations, yellowed linens, antique photo frames. Then Mia discerned a hollow panel behind an armoire. She pried it open. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in velvet. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Letters, dozens of them, all signed by Claire, all written in the final months before she disappeared from public view. She read one aloud to the editor of the Philadelphia Tribune. "My name is Claire Moore, and I possess evidence that my father attempted to declare my brother legally insane to protect his legacy. This letter may be the first of many." Maya's throat tightened. Edward sat beside her, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She contended for me," he whispered, "even when I was unaware of it." Maya held the letters to her chest. "And now we contend for her." They descended the attic stairs together, the box of truth cradled between them. The house was no longer silent. It was finally prepared to speak. The sun rose heavy and orange over the Moore estate, casting long shadows through the study windows as Mia laid Claire's letters out across the oak desk. She worked meticulously, her gloved fingers handling each envelope, fragile yet vibrant, an archive of one woman's unyielding defiance against quietude. Edward stood by her side, arms crossed, his eyes never straying far from the documents, as if still striving to convince himself of their authenticity. Arthur entered, still fastening the cuffs of his shirt. "Eleanor informed me you discovered them." "We did," Maya replied without looking up, "and they encapsulate everything Claire endeavored to articulate, everything she strived to safeguard." He stepped closer and selected a letter addressed to a now-defunct local newspaper. His mouth tightened as he read. "This one details how your father paid off a psychiatrist to sign Edward's commitment order." Edward's face darkened, but he remained silent. "And this," Maya added, holding up another page, "lists names, doctors, aides, even a nurse who attempted to speak up and was dismissed days later." Claire was documenting a systemic issue, not merely a single injustice. Arthur sat heavily in the nearby armchair. "Then we shall publish it." Edward raised his eyebrows. "Just like that?" Arthur nodded. "I have connections in the media who have been awaiting a justification to cease feigning my father was some inviolable saint." "But what about the family reputation?" Mia inquired. "The corporation? I would rather be remembered for rectifying this," Arthur declared, "than perish defending a falsehood." Mia exchanged a glance with Edward. "We will require assistance organizing this, scanning, authenticating, cross-referencing." "I have already contacted Reuben," Arthur replied. "He will arrive within the hour." As the day progressed, the estate transformed into a command center. The dining room became a war room lined with charts, notes, and photographs. Reuben arrived with a laptop and a portable scanner, swiftly establishing a workflow with Maya. Edward frequently took breaks, pacing by the windows or walking the grounds, as if re-establishing connection with the land he had once belonged to. By evening, Maya had compiled the majority of Claire's archive into a digital folder. Reuben silently clicked through them. "This," he finally stated, "is not merely a personal narrative. It is systemic, and you are possessing a historical record, but be prepared. Once this becomes public, people will demand retribution." Arthur looked over from the bar, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "Let them. We possess the truth." Reuben nodded. "Then you will require a collaborator in the press who will manage it with consideration." I know just the individual," Maya stated, "someone Claire once trusted." 2 days later, they convened with Camille Price, an investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Chronicle. She was a tall, composed woman in her 50s with discerning eyes and an empathetic demeanor. She arrived at the estate and was given a private briefing in the library. Camille listened to Maya's summary, then thoroughly examined the scanned letters and transcripts. After an hour, she slowly closed the laptop. "This is immense," she stated, "and poignant. You are revealing not only a personal injustice, but a generational suppression." Edward sat on the edge of his seat. "So, you will undertake it?" Camille nodded. "But it must be your narrative. I can draft it, but the world needs to hear from the individuals who experienced it." Arthur agreed. "We will provide statements and the documents. You manage the remainder." That night, Maya returned to her room, exhausted. Bryce slept peacefully nearby in his crib, the sound of his breathing like soft waves. She sat at the edge of her bed and opened her journal, pen poised above the page. She wrote, "Claire, we have discovered your voice, and we are going to ensure the world hears it." A knock at her door startled her. It was Eleanor. "May I?" the older woman inquired, entering with a tray of tea. Maya smiled. "Of course." Eleanor poured 2 cups and sat. "You have revitalized this house, you know." "I did not accomplish it alone." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But you were the one who refused to permit it to remain silent." Maya looked over at Bryce. "Sometimes the truth is more resounding than we perceive. We simply need to grant it existence." Eleanor raised her teacup. "To existence then, and to voices that emerge." By the conclusion of the week, Camille's article was complete. It was titled, "The Forgotten Son: How One Woman Defied a Dynasty to Save Her Brother." The preview alone became widely popular. Major networks called. Advocacy groups reached out. Former hospital staff submitted affidavits. The Moore legacy fractured wide open. Arthur received a call from the board of his company. Investors demanded clarifications, but instead of retreating, he issued a press statement acknowledging the narrative and pledging to contribute a portion of the company's earnings to mental health justice initiatives. At a press conference, Arthur stood beside Edward, Maya, and Camille. "I cannot alter the past," Arthur declared into the microphone. "But I can illuminate it. Claire Moore was not merely my sister. She was a protector, a truth-teller, and a legacy we will now honor." Reporters captured photographs. Edward remained silent, but he held his head erect. Maya stood beside them, calm, resolute. Claire's voice had finally found expression, and the world was attentive. The courthouse buzzed with a tense, hushed energy. Outside, protesters gathered behind barricades, holding signs that read, "Justice for Edward," and "Silence no more." Media vans lined the block, and hands were raised like flags in a storm. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and murmurs as people filed into the gallery. Maya stood beside Edward in the hallway, assisting him in adjusting his tie. He had not worn one in years. But today was not a day for comfort. It was a day for confrontation. "Are you all right?" she softly inquired. Edward nodded, but his hands trembled. "I never anticipated I would live to witness this moment. I believed I would perish a specter." "Not anymore," Mia asserted. "Today you are heard." Arthur approached, dressed in a dark navy suit, his face stoic but unreadable. "Our legal representatives are inside. We are not suing the hospital for monetary compensation. We are suing to compel them to release sealed records and issue a public apology. That is what Claire would have desired." Edward nodded again, his eyes misting. As the bailiff called for court to commence, Maya squeezed Edward's hand. "Let us complete what Claire initiated." The courtroom was a sea of suits, microphones, and piercing gazes. The more legal teams sat at one table. Across from them, the hospital's lawyers and administrators shifted uncomfortably. At the front, Judge Avery Carr, a stern woman in her 60s, renowned for her intolerance of corruption, adjusted her glasses and banged her gavel. "Let it be known," she began. "This is not a trial concerning money, but concerning memory, concerning justice delayed. Let us proceed." Arthur was the first to speak, taking the stand with calm dignity. "My father, Edward Moore, Sr., utilized power and privilege to suppress a truth that embarrassed him," he stated. "He manipulated systems, individuals, and policies to erase his own son. This is not conjecture. We possess letters, statements, and signatures proving a coordinated effort to label Edward as mentally unfit without legitimate cause." Gasps echoed in the gallery. The judge raised her hand for order. Arthur continued, "We are not seeking retaliation. We are seeking public acknowledgement. The world must comprehend the truth." Next, Maya testified. She described discovering the journal, unearthing Claire's letters, and piecing together a life unjustly concealed. Her voice was steady, her words clear. "I am not part of this family by lineage," she stated. "But I have cherished this child, Bryce, as if he were my own. And I have witnessed what silence inflicts upon a family." Claire did not merely contend for Edward. She contended for all the individuals the system attempts to erase. Judge Carr leaned forward. "And you believe this system still persists?" "Yes," Maya affirmed, "because Edward is not unique. He was merely the fortunate one to have someone maintain a record." The final testimony came from Edward himself. He stood with the aid of a cane, not from weakness, but to support the burden of memory. "My name was taken from me," he began. "I was informed I did not belong, did not matter, that I was defective, but none of that was accurate. My sister saved me. And now my family is present, not to mend what was broken, but to ensure it never recurs." He paused, his voice cracking. "I forgive them, but I will not permit them to forget." The room held its breath. After a tense recess, Judge Carr returned with her ruling. "In light of the evidence and testimony presented, I order the full unsealing of the hospital's records regarding Edward Moore's false commitment. Furthermore, I direct the institution to issue a formal public apology within 30 days and to contribute to a new foundation established in Claire Moore's name dedicated to advocating for mental health and ethical medical practices. Applause erupted in the courtroom before the gavel silenced it. Edward sank back in his seat, tears tracing paths down his cheeks. Maya gripped his shoulder. Arthur exhaled, a prolonged breath he seemed to have been holding for years. They had succeeded. They had spoken the truth. And the world had listened. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers. As the Moore family emerged, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Arthur stepped to the podium. "We are not present as victims," he declared, "but as witnesses to the potency of truth. My sister Claire was silenced. Today we speak not merely for her, but for every family who has lost someone to a falsehood cloaked in authority." He gestured to Edward. "This is my brother, and I am proud to utter his name." Edward stepped forward, hesitant at first, but the roar of applause imbued him with strength. "Thank you," he simply stated. Then, hand in hand, they walked away from the courthouse into a world that finally comprehended their narrative. That night, back at the estate, the family gathered in the drawing room. The fireplace flickered softly. Bryce, now nearly 2 years old, toddled from person to person, unaware that history had been revised that day. Eleanor raised a glass. "To Claire," she stated, "to the woman who perceived truth even when the world deemed her insane." "To Claire," they echoed. Edward took Maya's hand. "None of this transpires without you." Mia shook her head. "It was never about me. I merely pursued the light she left behind." Arthur turned to them both. "And now it is our responsibility to maintain its radiance." In the quietude that followed, the family sat together, not merely restored, but fundamentally remade. The wounds would never entirely vanish. But they were no longer concealed. They were identified, faced, and in that truth they discovered tranquility. In the weeks following the courtroom triumph, the Moore estate became a symbol not of inherited wealth or private influence but of redemption. Reporters lingered less. The buzz surrounding the case began to subside. But within those walls, a different narrative was unfolding, one that could not be encapsulated in headlines or press releases. Mia awoke before dawn, unable to sleep. The house, though still, hummed with an undercurrent of transformation. In the nursery, Bryce stirred in his sleep, murmuring nonsense to the shadows. She gently touched his cheek and tucked the blanket closer around him. He possessed no knowledge of what had been jeopardized for his future. And perhaps that constituted the greatest endowment. Downstairs in the library, Edward sat alone, gazing out the window. The morning mist hung low over the grounds. "You are awake early," Maya stated, entering with 2 mugs of tea. Edward faintly smiled. "Could not sleep. It feels as though my mind is attempting to process 30 years of silence all at once." She handed him a mug. "You do not have to perform it alone any longer." He looked at her, truly looked. "That is what I continually forget. For such a long period, isolation was my default. Even now, it is arduous to believe that I am permitted to belong." "You have always belonged, Edward. They merely confiscated the guiding map." He let out a hollow laugh. "That is poetic and painfully accurate." They sipped their tea in silence until Arthur entered, still in pajamas and robe. He seemed lighter now, as if divesting the family secrets had alleviated a burden that generations had borne. "Morning," he stated. The Chronicle's editorial board called. They wished to publish a follow-up interview. Edward raised an eyebrow again. Did they not already produce a 2-part exposé? Arthur shrugged. Apparently, the public cannot get enough of a redemption narrative, but this time, they desire you and Maya. Mia appeared startled. "Me? They believe your perspective as the outsider who became the guiding principle of this family adds something potent. And they are not mistaken." Edward hesitated. "Do you wish to?" Maya looked out the window. "I did not arrive here to be observed, but if our narrative assisted someone else in articulating their truth, then yes, I will undertake it." Arthur nodded. Then it was settled. Later that day, Maya and Edward sat in the identical study where weeks earlier they had unearthed Claire's letters. A journalist named Iris Chin, soft-spoken but perceptive, set up her recording device and offered a reassuring smile. "I recognize you have undergone a whirlwind," she stated. "This is not a mere rehash of the court case. I wish to comprehend what ensues: healing, legacy, family." Mia slightly relaxed. Edward folded his hands in his lap. "Let us commence with you, Edward," Iris stated. "What has existence been like since the verdict?" He considered his response. "Liberating but peculiar. I spent the majority of my adult life striving to remain imperceptible. Now I am requested to exist in full view. It is akin to relearning how to inhale." "And you, Maya?" Iris turned. "I arrived here to care for a child," Maya stated. "I did not anticipate uncovering a specter. But now I discern Claire was not haunting this dwelling. She was waiting for someone to conclude what she initiated." "Do you envision yourself remaining here?" Maya slowly nodded. "This place, it is imperfect, but it has transformed. The individuals have transformed. Bryce deserves to mature in a home that comprehends how to articulate veracity." Iris leaned in. "And do you believe justice has been rendered?" Edward spoke before Maya could. "Justice is not a destination. It is a resolution. You elect it daily, by articulating the truth even when it is arduous. Especially then." Iris smiled, deactivating the recorder. "That is the statement." That evening, as the house settled into its tranquil rhythm, Maya stood on the back patio, observing the sunset. The horizon blazed orange and gold, casting the old trees in silhouette. Bryce toddled across the grass, pursuing a butterfly. Arthur observed from a rocking chair, and Eleanor prepared lemonade inside. Edward joined Maya, his hands in his pockets. "I was contemplating," he stated, "what if we opened a portion of the estate to the public as a memorial space for Claire, for individuals like her?" Maya blinked, surprised. "You would share this locale?" He nodded. "Not its entirety. Just the west wing and the gardens. Establish an archive, a resource center, a place for people to learn, remember, and contend." She smiled. "That is beautiful and courageous." He chuckled. "You are the courageous one. I am merely catching up." They stood in silence as the sun dipped lower. Suddenly, Bryce stumbled and fell on the grass. Maya rushed over, but before she could lift him, he sat up and looked around unfazed, then clapped his hands at a robin landing nearby. Edward laughed. "That boy possesses fortitude." He will require it," Mia softly stated. "The world is not yet finished changing." That night, Mia returned to her room and extracted Claire's final letter, the one she had not yet disclosed to anyone. It was addressed not to a publication or a friend, but to the one who finds this. She unfolded the page, her hands slightly trembling. "If you are reading this, it signifies the truth did not perish with me. Thank you for believing in it, for advancing it. If you have endured suffering, I hope my utterances aid you in discovering illumination. If you are privileged, I hope they compel you to attend. And if you are adrift, I hope they direct you homeward." Maya closed her eyes, pressing the document to her chest. "I found you, Claire," she whispered, "and I will not permit you to be forgotten." Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The night deepened, and within the confines of the Moore estate, the heritage of silence had finally been permanently fractured. The initial frost of autumn painted the garden with silver filaments. Leaves crunched underfoot as Maya proceeded down the gravel path that curved through the western courtyard, soon to be designated the Claire Moore Memorial Garden. The appellation had been resolved during a family meeting the preceding week. But it had not felt tangible until the morning sun spilled over the newly installed wrought iron arch at the garden entrance. Etched into the iron were Claire's initials, Sin. Maya knelt beside a row of still-blooming roses, inspecting the soil and gently brushing away fallen leaves. The garden had become her morning ritual, a tranquil place for contemplation, a space where her heartbeat could steady. Claire had cherished flowers. There were references in her letters to garden walks and the peace they afforded her during the years she watched over Edward from the shadows. Now those identical flowers stood as emblems of resilience. Behind her, the sound of slow footsteps approached. Maya did not need to look up. She would have appreciated this, Edward stated, his voice warm with memory. She would have insisted on marigolds, Mia replied with a small smile. I located a note about them in her journals. Called them, Sunlight You Can Plant. Edward crouched beside her. We will plant them tomorrow, precisely at the center. They worked in silence for a few minutes, arranging flower markers and smoothing the earth. Then Edward spoke again, this time tentatively. I have been contemplating writing a book. Maya paused, brushing dirt from her gloves. About Claire, about everything, her narrative, mine, ours. He glanced at her. I do not desire people to recall us through second-hand articles. I wish to grant her the dignity of truth on our terms. I believe it is a beautiful concept, Maya stated. But only if you are prepared. I am terrified, he confessed. But perhaps that is precisely why I must undertake it. She gently touched his hand. Then I will assist you every step of the way. Later that afternoon, the Moore estate hosted its inaugural planning meeting for the public inauguration of the Claire Moore Memorial. Local community leaders, activists, and educators were invited, along with historians and representatives from mental health organizations. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation as Arthur stood at the forefront, tapping a folder against his palm. We are gathered here not to commemorate a tragedy, he began, but to honor a legacy of truth-telling. My sister presented us with a mirror. It is time we gaze into it. He gestured to the board where preliminary designs for the memorial were displayed, engraved quotations, timeline panels, a small library wing annexed to the garden entrance. We are also initiating a fund, he continued, for those pursuing mental health justice, and we desire the space to be open to dialogue, lectures, storytelling, and healing. Maya stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Claire's voice will serve as the cornerstone, but we also desire the community's voice. This place belongs to all who have been silenced. After the meeting, as guests mingled, an older woman approached Maya. She possessed silver hair pulled into a bun and a cane that softly clicked against the floor. You are the one who discovered the letters, she stated, her eyes moist. I knew Claire years ago. We met at a church function. She was brilliant, but one could perceive the burden in her eyes. Maya nodded. She carried so much in isolation. I am glad she is no longer solitary, the woman whispered. Thank you, thank you. In the weeks that followed, construction crews commenced reshaping the western garden. Workers cleared space for benches, pathways, and the small, glass-fronted archive building. Maya often supervised, bundled in a coat and scarf, Bryce toddling beside her. Edward established a writing space in the former sunroom, now transformed into his office. He spent hours dictating memories, transcribing Claire's journals, consulting Maya on tone, pacing, and veracity. One afternoon, Maya discovered him asleep at his desk, his head resting on a stack of papers. She did not awaken him. She merely draped a blanket over his shoulders and sat nearby, perusing one of Claire's letters for what felt like the 100th time. It still moved her, still pained her, still healed her. Then came a letter addressed to Mia, hand-delivered by a legal representative. It bore the seal of an estate executive. Mia carefully opened it, her hands trembling. It was Claire's last will and testament. Unbeknownst to anyone, Claire had amended her legal will shortly before her passing. And in it she had designated Maya as the guardian of her legacy. The phrasing was simple but unambiguous. To Maya Williams, whom I have never met, but have always harbored hope for. I entrust the narrative I could not convey. I rely on you to bear it with grace and to safeguard what I could not. You are and always will be family. Mia sat stunned, the document blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She clutched it to her chest and whispered, I will not disappoint you, Claire. I promise. She showed the letter to Arthur and Edward later that evening. They read it in silence, visibly affected. She knew, Arthur finally stated. Even before we did. Edward placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. Then, it is only proper that the first room in the archive is named after you. No, Mia firmly countered. Name it for her, but let us place a plaque beneath it. Something simple, something she would comprehend. They contemplated for a prolonged moment. Arthur murmured, "How about this? For the one who listened?" Maya nodded, smiling through tears. "That is perfect." And as autumn deepened around the Moore estate, and the first of the marigolds began to bloom in the heart of the garden, something else blossomed as well. Healing, yes, but also a sense of permanence, the kind only truth could sow, the kind only love could tend. It commenced with a creak. Maya had traversed the Moore estate for over a year now, but this sound, subtle and peculiar, had not been present before. She paused at the top of the servants' stairwell in the east wing, where the late afternoon sun filtered through frosted windows. Bryce was napping. Eleanor was out at her book club. Edward was in his writing den. She took a step back. There it was again, a low groan beneath the wooden floor. Not the typical complaint of an aging house, but something deliberate, isolated. Maya knelt and pressed her ear to the planks. Faint as it was, the noise recurred, 3 knocks, spaced out like a forgotten memory tapping at the threshold of awareness. That night, after everyone had retired, Maya returned with a flashlight and screwdriver. She carefully pried up the corner board from where the sound had emanated. Dust billowed. Her beam caught something metallic. She reached down and extracted a small tin box, its lid rusted shut. She hesitated, then forced it open. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and a bundle of letters. This time, in a man's handwriting, Edward's, but not the Edward she knew. The handwriting was dated, the tone younger, torn with desperation. Maya sat on the stairwell, reading by flashlight. Letter after letter, penned in secret and never dispatched. Addressed to Claire, apologies, please. Descriptions of solitude, of medication-induced fog, of dreams about the garden, about the house, about her. And one letter was different. Its paper was more yellowed than the rest. Its handwriting trembled. It read, "If anything befalls me, know this." I remember. Always did. They informed me I was broken, but I was not. I was afraid. And I remained silent because I believed I had to. But I recall the night they took me. The man in the suit, the nurse with the red lipstick, the falsehood they termed treatment. I remember, Claire, I remember you attempting to stop them. The letter was signed him. Maya's heart pounded. He had not been entirely silenced. Some part of him had resisted, leaving a trace, a fingerprint in history's dust. The following morning, Maya showed Edward the letters. He read them with trembling hands. "I must have composed these before the medications stole months of my memory," he murmured. "I believe a part of you attempted to resist," Mia stated, "and this is proof." They sat in silence, the tin box between them like a time capsule. Arthur joined them shortly after, reading in quiet disbelief. "We could utilize this," he finally stated, "in the memorial as a conclusive chapter, a symbol of resistance, even in captivity." Edward nodded. "Refer to it as the whisper, because that is precisely what it was, the faint murmur of truth striving to persist amidst the cacophony of deceit." As winter approached, preparations for the grand inauguration of the Claire Moore Memorial entered their ultimate phase. The garden, now golden with desiccated marigolds and winding ivy, appeared serene yet robust. The archive was completed, glass walls, warm interiors, and exhibits that merged digital storytelling with personal artifacts. Maya curated the final display, the whisper. It stood in isolation in the last corridor, a reproduction of the tin box, the letters encased in glass, Edward's voice playing in the background, reciting excerpts of his younger self's entreaties. Visitors would depart the exhibit in silence. Arthur assumed responsibility for the memorial's press campaign. The narrative had shifted from familial drama to a national discourse on institutional silence, on who is credited and who is interred beneath procedure. An op-ed jointly authored by Arthur and Maya appeared in the New York Times. Its title was straightforward, Claire's Garden. The day of the opening dawned cold and clear. Guests from across the country arrived. Scholars, survivors, advocates. Some had never met Claire, never heard of the Moore family, but had felt echoes of her suffering in their own lives. Maya stood at the entrance holding Bryce's hand, dressed in a dark navy coat with Claire's brooch affixed to her collar. Eleanor stood nearby, regal and quiet, her eyes scanning the crowd for specters and discovering only tranquility. Edward approached the microphone on the garden stone stage. He appeared leaner now, but clearer, like someone who had finally stepped entirely into the sunlight. "My sister was not flawless," he began. "She was incensed, brilliant, unapologetically assertive when it mattered most, and for that they attempted to silence her." He paused, surveying the crowd. "They failed." Soft applause arose, restrained, but deeply felt. Edward continued, "This garden is not solely for her. It is for every individual who has been told they were too much, too broken, too vocal. It is a place for whispers that refuse to perish." He stepped back. Then Maya stepped forward, Bryce in her arms. "This small boy will mature knowing his family's truth. Not merely the polished version, but the raw, chaotic, painful one, because that is where genuine affection resides, in honesty." She gazed up at the sky where a flock of birds traversed the winter clouds. "And today, we elect to articulate the truth, sufficiently loud to be heard." A bell softly chimed as the gates opened. Visitors stepped inside, passing plaques, flowers, letters, names. Some wept, some prayed, some simply stood still, absorbing the profound weight of history reclaimed. And in the midst of the garden, beneath the largest tree, a new plaque had been positioned. It read, "Claire Moore." She wasn't silent. She was silenced. And just beneath that in smaller script, "And still she spoke." Maya lingered there long after the others moved on. Bryce reached for a flower. She knelt, allowing him to touch the petals. "Observe this," she whispered to him. "This is what truth appears like." The boy smiled, then giggled, and somewhere deep within the very core of the garden, the whisper transformed into a song. The memorial had been open for 2 weeks when the first anonymous envelope arrived. No return address, no postage stamp, merely a cream-colored envelope with Maya's name penned in an elegant, old-fashioned script. Initially, she presumed it was a thank you card, another modest token from one of the visitors moved by Claire's narrative. But when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside was a single photograph. It depicted Claire, young and radiant, standing beside a man Maya did not recognize. He was impeccably dressed, tall, with a hawkish face. On the reverse of the photo was one line, hastily scribbled, "You do not comprehend everything. Proceed to the location where she first screamed." Maya slowly sat down on the library bench, her heart racing. She turned the photograph over again, scrutinizing the unfamiliar man. He appeared familiar in that haunting manner, like a countenance from a dream or a shadow from a forgotten tale. She flipped it again to the cryptic message, "Where she first screamed." Maya did not inform anyone immediately. Not Arthur, not Edward. Something about the note felt personal, targeted. If it was a menace, it was subtle. If it was a caution, it was urgent. Regardless, Mia required answers before involving the others. That night, after putting Bryce to bed and ensuring the house was quiet, Mia returned to the old estate blueprints stored in the archive. She pored over the layouts, tracing her fingers along the map of the East Wing, the wing that had been sealed for years. There, tucked between the original nursery and the servant stairwell, was a room marked "Storage Converted 1961. She stared at the date, the same year Claire had been institutionalized. Maya found the old key ring in the estate's archive drawer and crept to the sealed east corridor. The hallway was colder than the rest of the house, as if the air had not moved in decades. Dust clung to the corners like memory. She slid the key into the lock. The door yielded with a groan. The room was small, almost suffocating. A single broken chair sat in the corner, and the wallpaper was torn in long, angry scratches. On the floor lay a child's hair ribbon, faded lavender, knotted with time. Suddenly, the air shifted. Maya turned. A figure stood in the doorway, an old man, tall, with a hawkish face, the man from the photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. "I see you found the room," he stated. His voice was low, gravelly. She used to call it the box. "Fitting, isn't it?" "Who are you?" Maya inquired, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. He stepped forward, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. "My name is Richard Vance. I worked for the family long ago, before everything disintegrated. You were in that photo with Claire." He nodded. "She trusted me once, believed I could assist, but I did not. I could not." He moved slowly, sitting on the broken chair. The wood creaked under him like a confession. "I was present the night they took her," he stated. "Watched from the hallway as they dragged her out. They claimed she was hysterical. Claimed she needed help, but I knew the truth. She was not insane. She was incensed. Righteous. Why did you not stop them?" Maya inquired. Richard looked down. "Because I was a coward. And because they compensated me to remain silent." Silence stretched between them. "I am not here for absolution," he continued. "I am here because you awakened something. The memorial, the truth, it is incomplete." "What do you mean?" "There is another file, one known to no one, sequestered in the archives of St. Augustine Sanitarium, the institution where she was confined. It contains physicians' notes, medication schedules, and a report penned by a nurse who harbored doubts. She disappeared not long after." Maya's spine stiffened. "And you are only disclosing this to me now?" "I have borne it for years. Guilt ages one. I lacked the fortitude to confront it. But observing your accomplishments, what you have constructed, I realized someone had to carry the final piece." He extracted a folded sheet from his coat pocket. It was a photocopy, an address, a time-stamped reference number. "This is all I possess." Maya accepted it silently, her eyes scanning the page. "If you go," Richard stated, rising to his feet, "be cautious. Not everyone has forgotten Claire Moore. And not everyone is pleased her narrative is being divulged." He turned and vanished down the corridor before she could pose any further questions. Maya stood alone in the room, the photograph still in her hand, the dust swirling in the shaft of moonlight. The following morning, Maya summoned Edward and Arthur into the study. She laid out the photograph, the letter, and Richard's note. Edward stared at the image. "That man, I have seen him once years ago, lingering outside Father's funeral." Arthur's jaw clenched. "If this file exists, we must locate it before someone else attempts to bury it again." "I will go," Mia stated. "I wish to witness it with my own eyes." "You will not go alone," Edward firmly declared. Arthur nodded. "We will formulate a plan. Discreet, lawful, no headlines." Maya looked down at the ribbon she had retrieved from the floor the preceding night. Lavender, soft between her fingers. Claire's voice echoed in her memory, "Do not permit them to forget me." She would not. She could not, because now there was more than a garden at stake. There was still truth deeply interred. And Maya Williams was not hesitant to excavate. The morning was gray when Maya and Edward arrived at the outskirts of Westbridge, Massachusetts, where St. Augustine Sanitarium stood like a forgotten monument to suffering. The building was a sprawl of red brick and stained stone, partially abandoned, partially repurposed as a state-run mental health record archive. It smelled of decay and time, the sort of place history sought to eradicate by burying it in administrative procedures. Maya clutched the referral document Richard had provided her, an old medical record ID and a citation code. She had telephoned in advance and arranged a private research appointment under her journalistic credentials, omitting the complete narrative. Edward, posing as her legal assistant, carried a briefcase filled with supplementary documents in case they needed to invoke public record access laws. A woman in her 60s greeted them at the front desk. Her name tag read, "Carol?" "You are here for the Moore file?" she quietly inquired, as if even the name still held significance. "Yes," Maya replied. "Claire Moore? We were informed there might be personal notes in the restricted collection." Carol hesitated. Her eyes flickered to the security camera overhead, then to Mia's expression. Something in that gaze, equally composed and fiery, moved her. "Follow me," she stated, standing. She led them down a long hallway lined with rusting filing cabinets. At the far end was a locked room with a reinforced door. Carol entered a code, scanned her badge, and ushered them inside. Rows of archived patient files stretched the length of the room, boxed and labeled with numerical codes rather than names. She pointed to a table. I will grant you 30 minutes. Make copies discreetly. If anyone inquires, I did not permit you to view the nurse's journal. With that, she slipped out. Maya and Edward exchanged a glance. Nurse's journal? He whispered. They searched swiftly, following the old record ID, until they located the box. It was heavier than anticipated, filled with handwritten notes, typed reports, and several photographs, black and white, some blurred, all haunting. Maya flipped through the reports, each page more damning than the last. Claire's medication levels were triple the standard dosage. There were notations about her uncooperative behavior, refusing to remain silent, questioning the staff, insisting that her brother's condition was induced rather than organic. Then Maya discovered it, a slim leather-bound journal tucked between folders. She opened it. The first entry was dated July 1, 1961. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Nurse Elaine Thatcher. The 3rd of July 1961. I have been assigned to Miss Claire Moore. She arrived last night, sedated. She continually asserts she was compelled here, that her family betrayed her. I wish to believe she is deluded, but something in her eyes disquiets me. She is not broken. She is incensed. Page after page detailed Claire's deteriorating health, not from illness, but from excessive medication and isolation. Thatcher had questioned the attending physician's directives, Dr. Ronald Avery, but had been silenced. She had documented threats of being observed. Then abruptly the journal ceased. The final entry, dated September 9, 1961, read, "If anything befalls me, it will not be an accident. Claire is not insane. She is a witness, and someone does not desire her to speak." Edward clenched his fists. This is it. This is the conclusive proof. Maya photographed every page, careful to document even the marginal notes. She comprehended this was not merely evidence. It was a lifeline, a bridge from Claire's silence to her legacy. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway. They froze. Voices. 2 unfamiliar men. Edward quickly closed the box while Mia tucked the journal into her coat. The door opened. A tall man in a gray suit entered, followed by a younger assistant with a clipboard. The older man's badge read, Dr. Avery 3. Yes, he sharply inquired, surveying the room. I was informed someone was reviewing restricted files. We are with the Claire Moore Memorial Foundation, Edward smoothly replied, producing a document. Under Massachusetts law, Chapter 66, Section 10, we possess the right to access medical records of the deceased with direct family representation. Dr. Avery's eyes narrowed. That is quite a coincidence, given that my grandfather was the lead physician in this facility in '62. Coincidence, Maya evenly stated, is a gentle term for legacy. The man's smile was taut. I hope you are not implying impropriety. I am not implying, she rejoined. I am recording. Dr. Avery's face twitched, but he stepped back. Your time has expired. Please leave the documents on the table. We have concluded, Edward stated, placing an unrelated folder down. Thank you for your hospitality. They exited without another word. Only when they were in the car did Mia release the breath she had been holding. Did you observe his expression when I uttered, recording? She stated, grinning. I was not, but he is unaware of that. Edward laughed. You possess more fire than a courtroom prosecutor. Back at the estate, they uploaded everything to a secure drive and shared the files with Arthur, who sat in stunned silence as he read. This, he finally whispered, changes everything. They began drafting a public statement, careful, legally sound. The plan was to release the journal alongside a special exhibit in the memorial, the locked wing. Maya stood in the doorway of Claire's garden that evening, gazing up at the stars, the ribbons still in her coat pocket, the whispers now transforming into undeniable voices. She considered Elaine Thatcher, of the courage it required to write what she did, to risk everything for the truth. And she knew with absolute certainty that silence would never again prevail in this house. It was the eve of the new exhibit's launch when protesters arrived at the gate. Maya had been in the greenhouse with Bryce, demonstrating how to water the herbs Claire had once planted, when a call came from the front desk. There is a group here, approximately 20 people. Signs, chants. They are not violent yet. She handed Bryce to Eleanor, who nodded without a word and hurried out. Outside the memorial gates stood a mix of older men and women, many in suits, some in religious attire. One man stood at the forefront holding a placard that read, "Let the dead rest. No more slander." Maya recognized his face from a press clipping. Councilman Daniel Gresham, the grandson of a former St. Augustine's board member. They had anticipated backlash, but not this soon. "Miss Williams," Gresham called as she stepped forward, "are you the one spearheading this latest display of sensationalism?" "If by display you mean truth," Maya stated, "then yes. You possess no comprehension of the legacy you are tampering with. Names of good people, generations of effort to heal the mentally ill, tarnished for what? A headline." "No," Maya asserted, her voice steady, "for justice, for a woman who was silenced, for a nurse who disappeared for speaking out, for every individual who was confined for being inconvenient." Someone in the crowd yelled, "Shame!" Maya did not flinch. She stepped closer to the gate. "You are not obliged to concur with the exhibit, but the facts are now public. And no protest, no councilman's badge can unwrite history." Gresham's eyes narrowed. "This will not be our final encounter." "I sincerely hope not," Maya stated, "because next time I will possess a microphone." Inside, Arthur and Edward finalized the display panels for the locked wing. The exhibit commenced with a replica of the storage room Mia had uncovered, complete with ambient whispers and flickering lights imitating candlelight. It then guided visitors into a digital timeline of Claire's confinement at St. Augustine's, including scanned notes from Elaine Thatcher's journal, photographs of the sanitarium, and an interactive map of the restricted wing. At the center stood a sculpture, two hands, one clenched in a fist, the other reaching upward, emerging from cracked concrete. Beneath it, a plaque read, "The truth does not perish in silence. It waits." Maya entered with Bryce after the protesters dispersed. She stood before the sculpture, holding her son's hand as he stared up at it, wide-eyed. "Those are a strong lady's hands," he articulated. Maya smiled, blinking back tears. "Yes, baby. That is Claire." The launch night arrived with rain tapping at the windows like old memories. Guests filed in, umbrellas dripping, faces solemn but curious. The press was also present, quieter now, less sensationalist. Word had spread that this transcended a scandal. It was a reckoning. Edward delivered the opening address, his voice steady, despite the weight of legacy pressing down on him. "We once termed this the locked wing," he stated. "Now it is open. Not merely the rooms but the wounds. And with that openness comes the chance to heal honestly." Arthur followed with a reading from Elaine's journal, his voice faltering only once when she described Claire's laughter echoing through the halls before they silenced her. And finally, Maya stepped forward. "I arrived here as a domestic. I discovered a child. I was nearly expelled for performing what came naturally to a mother, but I remained because something indicated to me the true narrative had not yet been recounted." She paused, surveying the room. "You can bury truth for a season, but not eternally." Thunder rumbled softly above. After the ceremony, an elderly woman approached Maya. Her eyes were keen behind gold-rimmed spectacles, and she held a slender cane with a carved ivory handle. "You do not know me," she stated, "but I knew Elaine Thatcher. She was my cousin." Maya blinked. "You did?" "She vanished the year I graduated college. No one ever informed me why, but I recall the last letter she dispatched. She wrote, 'I have witnessed things I cannot unsee. I merely hope someone listens one day.'" She reached into her purse and extracted a small, sealed envelope. "This arrived last week. No return address, just my name. I opened it and discovered this inside." Maya unfolded the letter. It was a page torn from Elaine's journal, written in the same shaky hand. "They believe they have erased her. But memory is soil, and truth is seed. One day, someone will nourish it. and when it flourishes, it will crack the stone they have attempted to conceal behind. Mia closed her eyes for a prolonged moment, allowing the words to permeate her being. That night, long after the last guest departed, Maya returned to the sculpture in the dimmed hall. She stood alone, save for the faint hum of the lights. She placed Elaine's letter into a glass case beneath the sculpture, one final edition. Then she whispered, "We remember." Behind her, Edward entered quietly. "You achieved it," he stated. "You granted them voices." Maya turned to him. "No. They already possessed voices. We merely restored their platform." Edward nodded. Outside, the rain subsided, and inside, in the quietude of the memorial, the whispers finally found repose. Not silenced, but heard. Snow had begun to fall. That morning, Mia awoke to the soft sound of birds outside her window. The garden, now dormant in winter's tranquil embrace, stretched out beneath a sheet of white, its edges blurred, softened by the frost. Claire's lavender bush, trimmed and bundled before the first freeze, stood like sentinels in the stillness. Maya wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the back veranda. The cold air gently bit at her skin, but she did not mind. There was something honest about winter. No pretense, no facade, just what existed and what endures. Inside, Eleanor was preparing breakfast, softly humming to the rhythm of a life no longer marked by tension. Bryce sat at the table, drawing, his small brow furrowed in concentration. On the page, he had rendered a house, a garden, and 3 individuals holding hands. A woman, a child, and another woman with a ribbon in her hair. "Who is this?" Maya inquired, pointing. "That is Claire," he proudly stated. "She is not gone. She is flowers now." Mia's heart twisted with an ache that felt like tranquility. Edward entered, carrying the morning newspaper. His face was unreadable as he presented it to her. "Front page," he stated. The headline read, "Sanitarium Reckoning, Family Legacy Sparks Movement for Mental Health Transparency." Below it, a photograph of Maya standing beside the locked wing exhibit, her hand resting gently on the glass case holding Elaine's final letter. The article detailed the memorial's influence, families reaching out, narratives coming to light, lawmakers beginning to advocate for access to long-sealed institutional records. Claire's name had transcended a mere footnote in a tragic family history. She had become a symbol. Maya slowly folded the paper, her hand steady. Later that afternoon, an unannounced visitor arrived. He was middle-aged, with stormy gray eyes and a coat far too thin for the weather. He introduced himself as Thomas Avery, the grandson of Dr. Ronald Avery, the physician who had overseen Claire's interment. "I have come to articulate something," he stated, "and to listen." They sat in the study, the fire crackling low between them. "My grandfather," he began, his voice strained, "was not a virtuous man. He was meticulous, obsessive. He believed in order over truth. I matured with his specter overshadowing our family name." Maya remained silent. She permitted him to speak. "I discovered some of his notes after the exhibit opened. Private correspondences. He knew she was not unwell, that she had threatened to expose what the family had inflicted upon her brother. He termed her a liability. Thomas extracted an envelope. "I no longer desire to bear his silence. This belongs here." Maya accepted it quietly. When he departed, she opened the envelope. Inside was a confession of sorts, a letter never dispatched, penned in Ronald Avery's cursive. He detailed the manipulation of Claire's diagnosis, the pressure from family stakeholders, the payments, the threats. It was condemning. She presented it to Edward that evening. "We will add it to the archive," he stated. "Let it stand beside Elaine's words. Let them articulate together." The week passed tranquilly. Visitors arrived, drawn by word of mouth, by the quiet power of truth expressed without spectacle. They brought letters, photographs, mementos of their own loved ones lost to silence. One woman wept at the sculpture, whispering, "My mother was confined there too. She never returned home." An older man in a veteran's jacket placed a folded flag at the garden gate. And a young nurse, just commencing her career, positioned a single stethoscope under the plaque bearing Claire's name. "I wish to remember what listening appears like," she stated to Maya. On the final evening of the year, Mia stood in the garden once more. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Arthur joined her, his breath visible in the cold. "She transformed everything," he stated, gazing at the memorial lights glowing through the windows. "No," Maya asserted. "She planted the seed. We merely nurtured it." They stood in silence for a prolonged period. Then Arthur turned to her. "I wish to establish a scholarship for women like Elaine, for nurses who speak out." Maya nodded. "And I will assist in its construction with Claire's name." As the clock struck midnight, soft chimes echoed from the town square down the hill. Fireworks bloomed in the distance, reflected in the frosted glass of the house behind them. Maya knelt and brushed snow from one of the garden stones. Claire's name was etched there, simple and potent. "Sleep well," she whispered. "You are not forgotten." Inside, Bryce ran through the hall, laughter trailing behind him like light. And in the heart of winter, a garden began to anticipate spring.